Honored to have Mr. Joe Bortz. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Am I on the air right now?
You are live on the air. Thank you for your patience, Joe.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. I'm looking out my window right now. I'm wondering if you have the same weather out. You're in Arizona, right?
Yes, sir. We just finished golfing.
Well, we're looking forward to a nice white Thanksgiving here.
Yeah, well,
snowing out.
we missed the snow for sure. And Joe, you've had an illustrious background as an avid collector, saving these vehicles from the kiss of death. I've got to ask you, what was the turn on? A lot of our folks listening now have some pretty unique stories about how they acquired, an Impala and started restoring. And that's the lifeblood of the passion, because it doesn't always go well. What kickstarted you with some of these amazing cars?
Well, I think there's a lot of fellows that have the same story that I have, is from the time that they were 3 or 4 or whatever age, they loved to play with cars, and that just kind of grew and grew. And here in Chicago, we had the International Car Show at the amphitheater, and back then it was safe to get on a street car and take it to the amphitheater, and I think I was probably 10, 11 years old, and me and a friend would get down to the amphitheater, and our biggest thrill would be to try and get somebody to put us up on their shoulders so we could see the concept cars as they were being presented at the show. And, of course, it was always a dream to just be able to see the cars and find somebody that would lift us up so we could see over the crowd. And the idea of ever being able to get close to one or touch one or sit in one or much less drive one was, be like thinking that maybe we're going to take a rocket ship to the moon or something. It was just it was inconceivable. So I've been, as they say, blessed in that sense that, it's all your dreams come true kind of thing, and I've been very fortunate to be able to have the collection that we've been able to put together over the decades.
Yeah, I got to let the people know the Bortz Auto Collection has been displayed at just about every major car museum, Museum of Science and Industry, the Gilmore Museum, the Cleveland Auto and Aviation, the Petersen Museum. And as a sense of someone, let's talk about a youngster that may be seeing this sort of, they may think it's odd with everything that now is, moving fast with technology. We just announced that Waymo is going to be full-bore autonomous vehicles. Are you still seeing youngsters with the gleam in their eye, just like you had, to trigger their passion for cars?
Well, certainly, the passion for cars is strongly tied in with imagination. And, imagination is really the superior entity of the mind. And I think that, there's people who are imagining things today that will be the retro cars of tomorrow, and people that are young people today will want to collect those cars. And certain cars, I say, not only are a collector's piece for a particular period, but some are so magnificent that they go into the following periods of collecting, because there are periods of collecting. When I started collecting back in the 60s, all the guys that were collecting back then were collecting brass cars, and if you wanted to collect what was then something new called classic cars like Packards and those kind of cars, they would say, don't waste your time on that. And then, of course, I was collecting classic cars, and it went into cars that were of the 50s, later on as an advanced type of collecting. So there's a moving target for collecting, and certainly, out in Arizona, that's an epicenter for collecting.
It is. We're spoiled. Joe, I got to tell you in the garage, I've been known to tell the rest of my peers in the industry, you keep your iron on that side of the Mississippi, because we get a little rusted. Boy, we need therapy.
Oh, yeah. No, I have a lot of friends that I went to high school with, and one of them out there is a major collector. His name's Alan Gartzman, and I get out to see him every so often and get to the Barrett-Jackson auctions and things like that. And we've had cars of our own in the Barrett-Jackson auction, and several of the cars that are famous at the Barrett-Jackson auction were at one time in our collection, such as the Futureliner bus and the Bonneville Special, which we have the other one still in our collection. There was 2 of them made,
Yeah. As these cars had been featured, Pebble Beach and the Louis Vuitton Classic in New York's Rockefeller Center, Auto Week coined the term automobile archaeologist.
Oh, that's good.
Joe, how do you feel being an automobile archaeologist? Do you feel like an archaeologist? I mean, with all the work that you're doing?
Well, that term was actually coined in an article when we made the Great War Hoop discovery in 1988. And the cars that were there were 4 cars, the 1955 Chevy Biscayne, the 1956 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham Town Car, and the 2 LaSalles, the 1955 LaSalle Roadster and the sedan. And the cars were supposed to be cut up and crushed, and they weren't. And the owner of the junkyard took and hid them, and they were there for decades. And there was always the rumor that they were there, but the owners there kept them hidden. And eventually we were put in touch with the owner, and he said for me to come out and take a look at something. And I flew out there, and there were these 4 cars. But a lot of the pieces had literally fallen off into the ground. So after we made a deal for the Bortz Auto Collection to acquire the 4 cars, we were there literally digging in the ground looking for pieces that had
All right, so wait a minute. That's it.
And so when they wrote the article for Auto Week, they coined that phrase, I believe, for the first time. Automotive archaeologist Joe Bortz was there digging up the pieces that had fallen off the car. So I think that's where it started.
That's fascinating.
That's awesome.
You said that for folks listening. So the War Hoops was essentially a used car lot. I don't like to use the word junkyard. I like recycling.
No, it was a junkyard.
But it was a junkyard. It is what it is.
It is what it is.
No.
So why? I have a question because I read this very same statement. Do you think that because he held on to them, he knew what he had? But was he allowed to do that? Wasn't GM pretty tight-lipped about a lot of these concept cars?
Well, once the cars were given over to the junkyard, that passed the title to the junkyard. Technically.
So ownership.
Yeah.
So but the fact that he didn't follow the instructions, of course, is a fortunate part of history because they were actually saved. And these particular cars, the highest level of concept cars from a collector's point of view would be Motorama cars, and that's the cars from the GM Motorama that started in '53 and went through almost a decade later, and that's considered the highest level. And then of course there's the Virgil Exner cars, the Ghia cars, and that would be the second highest level. And then there's all sorts of cars in that surround that. But it was like with the Y job, which you mentioned. I don't know if I can mention the answer to your question.
Well, in honor of we got the automotive archaeologist. Joe, you can do whatever you like, buddy.
Okay. Well, the answer to the question was obviously the Y job was the first concept car, and it was Harley Earl that did that, and it was his way of wanting to test the reaction of the public to design cues. Design cue is defined as a particular part of a design of a car, whether it's the front end, the roof design, the tail lights. And also he wanted to make General Motors, which was the largest corporation in the world after the war, to let them know that General Motors was thinking ahead, just as they're talking about the self-driving cars now. They were talking about such things as jet engines back then, microwaving, which was just in its infancy, and General Motors was telling about it. So all those things were, the advanced ideas that were coming down the track, and General Motors was on the forefront with those.
Yeah.
So,
since you're talking about some of this amazing technology, I wanted to ask you about the nuclear car, but we do have a couple of texts. Bree what do we have for texters here? What are they saying?
Alrighty, so we have one texter that says it's the Buick car. The other texter says it's the nuclear car.
All right, well, the Buick, you got it right. We got the aficionado, so clap to you. We'll get you the $50 Visa gift card. And sorry, what name do we have? We don't have a name?
That's Jim. Jim is the
Jim,
winner.
thank you. Yeah. So some would believe, what were we thinking? I mean, in the 50s and 60s, state-of-the-art, cutting edge, we just got back from an ugly war, and it was in vogue to spend and be proud. And so, but what were we thinking about the nuclear deal? I mean,
Well,
do you have that? Did you?
yeah.
Okay,
When,
tell us
when
about
you
that.
when you the war, of course, was a major reset for the whole world, and the Americans felt that they won the war, which they probably did, and their attitude was, if you got it, flaunt it. And of course, when they took that attitude too far, you ended up with, a book called The Ugly American, where they got too proud. But that's really not the situation with the cars, because their attitude was, if you got it, flaunt it. And they put the emphasis and the investment in design more so than in engineering. And so that's how Harley Earl got to be. He was the vice president of design, but he was really kind of running General Motors in a way, because the design was the locomotive for General Motors in all respects.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I engineering is one thing, but I'm saying let's bring back a day of design, people. We need the old designs and the chrome and the big tail fins. Mr. Joe Bortz, please hang with us. I do have a special caller. He's going to be joining us. We're also going to talk about some of the cars that were salvaged and maybe some of the hiccups that happened before we...
Sure.
Very good. Hang tight with us. Wrench Nation, we're talking concept. We got Mr. Ken Vela. Bring it in. Mr. Ken Vela.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Ken Vela out of Huntington Beach, WIKD Customs. We've got Joe Bortz and Ken Vela, and there is a connection here. Ken, tell us about 35 years ago, what was your connection to Mr. Joe Bortz?
Well, it was very, very interesting. I was a DJ at the time, and I worked at a club called Blue Suede Shoes in Burnham, Illinois. And that club, actually, Joe owned that club. And
Wow.
I was a DJ there and heard about Joe and his collection, and I was all excited because I was, young, fresh. I was 19. I had a 63 Impala that I drove to the club. That was my daily driver. And I remember one night in particular, he shows up with, I believe it was a 68 Shelby GT 500. Am I correct, Joe, on that one?
Yeah, it was
Blue?
a cool one.
Wow.
Now, Ken, when you were telling that story, I'm actually looking at a picture of you back in the 80s with a red T-shirt on,
Oh, no.
and you've got a set of hair
All
on
right,
you.
so you had a set of hair. It's early 80s. This is before Ken Vela dove in to some of the renowned builds that you are responsible for, specifically with that amazing WIKD Porsche nitrous breathing.
Yeah.
But isn't it amazing, guys? The automotive circle does kind of come full that
Full
way.
circle.
It does, man. Yeah.
Well, it was so much fun, and I have to say, Joe, it was such an inspiration because I actually took him for a ride. I was really surprised. I was really, I mean, I vividly remember it, even though it was so far ago, that I was really nervous. I was like, God, this great man with this great collection, and I'm just this little kid, and with this car that was, I was doing my best, as we all do, growing up, and not a whole bunch of money. And I said, Joe, would you like to go for a ride? And we went for a ride in my car, and just that moment was just, that was a turning point for me, just to keep going, and just the approval and just how gracious he was on that ride. I never forgot that, and we flash ahead 35 years and building some custom cars, and I reached back out to Joe and said, hey, you remember me? And sent some pictures, and we connected again, and it's just amazing how it all turned out.
Yeah, no, it's I think, Joe, one of the wonders, because we know blood, sweat, and tears when you're taking a vehicle that has a tree growing through it, a concept vehicle at War Hoops that has a tree stump through it. That restoration is painstaking, but I think at the end of the day, when you come to that full restoration, the underbelly of inspiration to all generations, talk on that. Joe, you really get thrilled when you see the fans come out and look at the collection.
Well, that's an interesting question. Yes, I mean, everybody likes to have approval, and certainly, whatever your endeavor is, to be able to have people show their approval is, very heartwarming. And in collecting, there's a certain amount of selfishness where you're doing what you want to do, you're collecting what you want to collect, and that's very satisfying to you personally. But when you get the acclaim and the admiration of other people for what you were doing, and I quote unquote selfishly, it really makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you were doing something bigger. And certainly when I started collecting the concept cars, frankly, when I started collecting the concept cars, I was criticized for it because in order to buy some of them, I had to sell some classic cars. And the guys with the classic car enthusiasts said, "Are you crazy? Selling a nice Packard or something for one of those fiberglass things?" And I was doing what I wanted to do, what made me feel good. And then eventually it became the vogue thing, and it is very satisfying. And I think that's an important element in life is to not play to the crowd, but to play to yourself. And very often the crowd will follow, with what you're doing if you're doing something that has a good common denominator to it,
By way of restorations, absolutely. And the sort of the feeling that you get that you made it through mechanically. I mean, we both know, all of us here and folks listening know that you have those bad days and you sometimes have to walk away. But the inspirational level, Ken and I talk about this all the time, Joe, whether it's at Malibu Wheels and Waves or, the Good Guys show that premiered, or it's the upcoming Barrett Jackson or Drew Alcazar's Russo and Steel. Like, part of what we're doing is the art. It is the selfishness of how we want this to be. But the underbelly is that inspiration and next generation. And what you have done in that collection, I have not seen the collection, and I am eager. Speaking of which, are you touring? Is there anything, folks listening now, if they want to see the collection, where can we see those pieces?
Well, in the 90s and the early 2000s, we had the cars on tour, and like you mentioned previously, they were at the Gilmore Museum and the Museum of Science and Industry in the main rotunda, and 3 times we were featured at the Petersen Museum. We're the only collection, private collection, that was the feature, not the participants, but the feature of Pebble Beach 3 times.
Wow.
In the last 40 years. The last time was 2008. And, so it's just a satisfying thing, and like I say, the real inspiration is something you're doing for yourself. But then, as you get the acclaim of the public, you start to really not only do it for yourself, but you start to do a weave of the collection that makes it more important for what the collection starts to represent, and that's what happened with the concept cars.
Right. Tell us, speaking of weave, there was a lot of weaving regarding the president, the Bank of Cuba, and a particular car. I found this very fascinating. I read, Joe, can you set the story straight? What business did you have with the car that came from Cuba? Tell us the story about that.
Well, there's a little history to understanding that story. General Motors was a very wealthy company, so they were making in-house their own concept cars. But concept cars, literally back then, would cost, maybe $1 million to make. And, of course, in today's, dollars, that might be $10 million. And not all of them were that expensive. But anyhow, the Chrysler Corporation was not anywhere near as wealthy as General Motors, and so they came up with a formula where they had their master designer, Virgil Exner, design their concept cars, and then they would take that design and send it to Ghia in Italy, who would do the work for a lot less than it cost in America. And then they'd bring the cars in. So the cars were really Italian-built, American-designed.
Wow.
And they would use the running gear from Chrysler. Well, the Customs decided that the cars were really foreign, in the sense of the technicality, and they wanted to charge duty on them, and a lot of duty. So Chrysler balked on it, and they came up with an arrangement that the concept cars could be brought into the United States and stay here without duty for something, I have no idea the real number, but it was something like 24 months or something, and then they had to get it out of the country or they had to pay duty.
Right.
So a lot of the Chrysler concept cars were sent out of the country, and the Plainsman station wagon, the Chrysler Plainsman station wagon, 1955, was sent to Cuba, and it was actually given to the president of the Cuban banks. And
I'm sure he liked that. It was just given. Here, take.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was just a present. Yeah.
Sure,
because they were whatever. Who knew?
I mean, I would have liked
what
that.
what they were trying to get in exchange.
Sure.
Maybe get their cars brought in. At a special rate into Cuba, the production cars, whatever.
Mm.
And when the revolution happened, the president of the Cuban banks was assassinated in the front seat of the Plainsman station wagon.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
And the car was sent back to
Fidel Castro didn't care about a 56 Plainsman.
Well, this was I think this was before Castro.
Okay.
This was before Castro. It
Gotcha.
was that whole area, that whole time was very much in turmoil.
Sure.
And the car went back to the Chrysler dealership, and the export manager for Chrysler was living in Cuba, and he had a big estate there. And when Castro came in, he was starting to basically get rid of Americans down there, and he methodically was getting rid of them one by one, and the export manager got word that he was going to be the next one that was going to be arrested and whatever. So they made plans to escape, him and his family, and they had a large estate, and they built a gate in the back of the estate. The estate was fenced in, and they basically escaped one night in the Plainsman station wagon, out the back gate, down to the harbor, lowered on some type of large vessel, and brought back to the United States. And that's the kind of the story of how the export manager acquired the car from the Chrysler dealership when it was returned to the Chrysler dealership after the president of the Cuban bank was murdered.
Wow.
And the car stayed with that family until I got it, I don't know, probably in the early 90s. And the blood stains, there were still some blood stains on the leather front seat.
No way.
So, Joe, a lot of us, before we wrap it up, we're going to carry over one more segment, but a lot of folks listening, what is your technique? Like, where do you go? I mean, you're in the know, you have a network. What would be your advice about where to go to find maybe not the concept cars, but some unique pieces? What advice could you give folks?
My advice to other collectors, whatever level they're at, is always buy intrinsic value first. Don't buy condition. So, if you have a 55 Chevy two-door sedan that is a six-cylinder stick shift, in other words, just a bare-bones Chevy, but it's got a $50,000 restoration on it, that could be a bad investment because the intrinsic value isn't there. You're better off taking your money and buying something that is somewhat unrestored but has higher intrinsic value, because the intrinsic value is what trumps the situation every time.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So you should always get the best of the intrinsic value and worry about the condition later.
All right, so Joe Bortz, running one of the world's renowned concept vehicles. We also have Ken Vela. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about, Joe's not done. Joe connected with Ken Vela again. After 35 years, we're going to talk to Joe and Ken about what kind of deal making they've got going on. What car
Welcome
could
back,
be
Wrench
next?
Nation.
Frank and Susie hanging with you. We've got Joe Bortz and Ken Vela. Joe Bortz, an avid collector. In fact, one of the most powerful and I have to say responsibly put together concept cars. Joe, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You and Ken got together. Ken, are you hanging?
I'm here.
Good. Tell us, after 35 years, many want to know what's cooking in the garage. Joe, do you want to lead off here?
Sure, yeah. I was just saying to somebody this afternoon, I was saying, on December 4th in 3 years, I'll be 80 years old. So
That's a hand. That's a clap.
And a lot of my old-time friends and guys that are, 60, 70, 80, and 90, when it comes time for them to get their cars into the marketplace because they want to reduce their collection, they call me up, and I can always recommend somebody that is interested in this particular car or that particular car, and sometimes I even help them with their marketing program because that's my, experience in business for decades was marketing, in the restaurant business, and we even had some nightclubs that were called Blue Suede Shoes, and interestingly enough, one of them had a museum on it, but
nice.
we won't go there right now. And,
we need another hour.
I was always impressed with Ken because he was one of the employees that was working with us at the time that was interested in old cars, so I always remembered him. And, recently, a couple of years ago, we got in touch with each other, and he was telling me about a friend of his that had an old Lincoln that the fellow wanted to get the car sold, and Ken was able to help the guy get some pictures and this and that, and I was able to, introduce the guy to somebody that was interested in that particular car, and it got sold, and Ken, was able to get from the owner a commission on it and all that, and it was my pleasure to do all that, and I do that for a lot of the old guys, and we help them set up marketing programs or try and help them get hooked up with somebody that has interest in their cars so that they can make their own deals and things like that.
Joe, do you find that a lot of folks that may be in that position, and Ken, you can chime in as well, because certainly you've had done a tremendous job building and designing vehicles over the years. Do you find that here is a situation where we get a deal, we restore it, and we enjoy it, and we want to move on? Is it a difficult situation to unload a vehicle and get the best price? And how do you do that? Joe, start off with Joe.
Well, I mean, you have to take into consideration that a car collector never has a problem knowing what to buy. I mean, there's the inspiration there. So they're going to be real good at buying what they want. When it comes time where they have to or want to separate themselves from their collector vehicle, the thing that they get in exchange is money. So they want to, be sure that they're getting, a fair market share from the market for their collector car. And, people will call me and ask me for my advice on some values and where they should go or who I might know that I can steer them to, help them get their cars sold. And I'm always happy to do that. And, Ken is a lot younger than me for sure, and he's a very inspirational guy, and he really helped his friend out getting it was a Lincoln. And, for me, it's like a lot of fun because, with the concept cars, there's not a lot of action because, you don't find a concept car too often. You can go for years and not find another one these days. So, the action of helping people get together and find somebody that wants their car is my pleasure, and I enjoy doing that. And I do it for the old guys mostly. Most of the younger guys are, I'm not in touch with, but people that are 60, 70.
Well, if I would
80.
just say, if you're listening, we have a huge podcast audience that will get this on Sunday. get connected. BortzAutoCollection.com. Ken, I have a question. Ken Vela, the international market over the years, is there a demand that we've not seen before, perhaps in Europe or maybe China, for some of our goodies here in the States?
One thing that may come in mind is we had talked about earlier about Cuba. I kind of wonder what's going on with that whole thing, being that now it's open. Joe, I think you would probably know a lot more on that.
Yeah,
Before we wrap it up, Joe, is there an international scene? Are you finding?
Of course, yeah. Sweden is a country that loves American cars. They love American custom cars. They love Mustangs. There's different countries. A lot of the countries like England love to get back some of their English cars like Jaguars and XKEs. And same thing in Germany. They like to buy back their Mercedes cars.
And Australia, too.
Yeah, Australia, New Zealand,
Mm-hmm.
they buy a lot of cars. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So
Well, all right.
It's an international market with the computers today. And of course, that's an art in itself, knowing how to do that. And we're, like I say, most of the older guys are not computer savvy. And, I have Debbie here. She's a computer whiz, my other half. And, so she helps out a lot of the guys who want to figure out how to get their cars, computerized, so to speak, into the internet
and get that out. Yeah. Well, I tell you, we want to let the world know. BortzAutoCollection.com. There's some great videos, some amazing history. We did no justice with 1 hour, and we always say we need another hour. Thank you kindly, Joe Bortz, for visiting. We would like to see you again soon. We're going to stay in touch.
My
Thank you, sir.
And anytime you want to return, just give me a call, and I've enjoyed.
We'd love to
show.
highlight the amazing things. And Ken Vela, thank you. Ken had a lot to do. I would have never. Wrench Nation is in gratitude to Mr. Ken Vela, WIKD Customs. Ken, where can people find you? You doing anything this weekend? Any shows? What do you got coming up?
Weekend,
Shout out.
Actually, show-wise, we're taking a little bit of a break. You've heard recently about the Malibu fires that are going on.
Oh, yeah, man.
One of our good friends lost his collection. And,
no.
everything. So Saturday we're going to go down and sift through the rubble and see what we can resurrect and find and help him out. It's unbelievable. It's Tom Panenzio. He's producer.
I've met Tom and
You
Ken.
met Tom.
Listen,
He's
our
responsible
hearts.
for Joan Jett. They're discovering Joan Jett and working with Paul McCartney, Lennon, and everybody. So,
Wow.
Well, listen,
so we're going to all rally together, and that's going to be our weekend. It's going to be really
well, give my
difficult,
regards.
but,
Our hearts go out, brother. And here in the desert, Arizona, you got some power behind help. If you need anything, we're going to connect soon. Ken Vela, thank you so much for hanging.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Happy Thanksgiving, brother.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Day.
Yes, and for you joining us every week, especially out there in podcast land, you guys rock. Make it safe, and as I say every week, be safe. Hug each other, and never forget to hug a mechanic.